Okay, thanks, Mark. Next, we're going to hear from a good friend of mine, Michael Walsh. Michael's with the MUN Student Union and was in Toronto protesting and saw what happened firsthand, and he wants to share some of his experience with us here today.
Need to get the shade. Hot in the shade.
As a child, I was taught that Canada was the best country in the world. Woo! I learned that we're a peaceful nation. I learned that each and every Canadian is valued, and I learned that Canada values human rights. It took me years to learn all of these things, but only days to unlearn them.
Jay.
I spent the last week of June in downtown Toronto to protest the G8 and G20 and attempt to spread the message that these meetings are an exorbitant waste. A message that was lost in the media, buried under veils of vandalism and violence. I'm sure you're all well aware of this story by now. After 3 days of peaceful demonstrations, on the first day of the G20, things went awry. When somehow, amidst hundreds of police officers, some shops in the downtown area were damaged. And somehow, after over $1 billion of spending directly on security, after there were some damage to some police cars. Then, after failing to protect the city from damage, after failing to do what they were hired to do, what $1.2 billion was spent to do, the police turned on innocent civilians. Sunday, the morning after the large demonstration in which over 25,000 people marched the streets, a group of students, friends of mine, went to protest the unnecessary arrests outside the makeshift jail. It was a very peaceful protest with chants and songs, and the most dangerous actions being taken were the pumping of fists in time with the chants. And yet the police dispersed the crowd using smoke bombs and tear gas. After leaving the demonstration for fear of being arrested, our group traveled towards the home of a fellow student. We were followed over 10 blocks by a police cruiser, which then sat outside her house for over half an hour while we ate breakfast and made a list of all of those students from our group who had been unfairly arrested. This was not the Canada that I had learned about as a child. Luckily, I returned home unscathed, but I watched as my friends were beaten with long metal rods. I watched as innocent civilians were shot at with rubber bullets and tear gas. And I watched as peaceful protesters were arrested without just cause. I refuse to stand by and watch these injustices be accepted any longer. And I encourage you all to join me, to rise up and demand accountability, to demand justice, and to demand a public inquiry. In one weekend, I learned what it's like to feel unsafe in your own country. I learned what it's like to be afraid to wear a backpack in the street for fear of being searched. I learned what it's like to feel unsafe wearing a button in the street because for one weekend, dissent became means for interrogation and arrest. I learned that all of those things that I knew about Canada as a child could be forgotten in a weekend. We, as the Canadian people, must not forget. Today and over the past week, people from across our country have united to demand a public inquiry into the police actions during the G8 and G20 in Toronto. We must continue to pressure our MPs and the federal government to make this inquiry a reality. We must ensure that those responsible for silencing peaceful protesters with brute force will be held accountable. We need answers, and we need to be ensured that a travesty like this one does not occur in our country ever again. It's important that we remember the messages of those peaceful protesters who were silenced. The G8 and G20 were created so that the rich can continue to make decisions on behalf of the entire world, despite the fact that a global governing body, the UN, already exists. I can think of many ways that this money could be better spent, and the banner that they had over here that everyone had signed over here displays many great ways that money could be alternatively spent. Yeah, feel free to add your own thoughts to the banner. Yeah. We have to show the the federal government that we are unhappy with the G8 and G20, and we are shaken by this infringement on our civil liberties. We will remember what happened on June 26th and 27th. We will remember the message of the protesters. We will demand a full public inquiry into the actions of the police. And we will continue to defend our right to protest.